Welcome to Verastahl, a YouTube channel devoted to my horror stories. I'm Brandon Faircloth, and if you enjoy the story you're about to hear, please like, share, and subscribe. If you check the links down in the description, you can find all of my books on Amazon, including my newest book, The Joker's Wild, as well as the books that this story that I'm reading today actually comes from. Those books are called The Outsiders, and so far there are 2 books in that series with more to come. Today's story is called, I Think My Grandfather Might Be a Serial Killer, Part 7. The 911 operator wanted me to stay on the line, but I told her I needed to go, that I would be looking out for the patrol cars. Hanging up my phone, I stuffed it back into my pocket and looked again at my grandfather, who was still sitting silently staring at me. Okay, this is your last chance. For real. They are on their way. You need to tell me what's going on right now before they get here. We can still fix this, or at least help it. I need to understand what you've done. He glanced at the clock up on the wall and then back to me. It's better we wait, actually. It shouldn't take them more than 10 minutes to get here, likely less. I wouldn't get very far in that amount of time, and you need to hear everything for you to understand any of it. He smiled at me. We'll just wait until they've left, and then we can continue if you want. I was confused and frustrated. Grandpa, if they come here and find that body, they're going to be taking you when they leave. There won't be any more story time. Maybe you need to go with them if what you're saying is the truth, but I'm trying to help you. Talk to me before you have to talk to them. He gave a laugh. I know you're doing what you think is best, Jason. I appreciate it. If I were in your shoes, I'd probably do the same thing. But don't worry about me. Everything is going to work out just fine. I wanted to protest more, but what was the point? Instead, I just stood by the counter, my gaze roaming between the window and the floor. I couldn't look at him anymore. I felt myself feeling more and more guilty and disquieted by his reaction to me calling the police, and I tried to stop from second-guessing myself. I had done the reasonable thing after listening to hours of his insanity, and I needed to remember that. There they are. I looked up to see my grandfather looking out the window, and as I followed his gaze, I saw 3 sheriff's deputy cars pulling up outside. I went to the back door in the kitchen and opened it, calling for them to come around that way. They asked me to step outside and tell them what was going on, which I did, focusing most on the large mustached man who was doing most of the talking. Hey, thank you for coming. My grandfather, I saw him last night moving a woman's body out of his car and carrying it into the woods. I talked to him about it this morning, and he was telling me all kinds of crazy stuff. And he admitted to killing that woman. I don't know what really happened, but I'm worried he's had some kind of break. He's close to 80, and he's still real sharp, but I broke off as the lead deputy raised his hand. Hold up, son. Is this Dr. Barron we're talking about? He's your grandfather? I nodded. Yeah, he is. He cut me off again. Okay, where is he now? I wasn't sure what to make of his reaction, but I turned and pointed to the house. He's in there. I've got him tied up to a chair in the kitchen. When I turned back, the 2 backup deputies had guns drawn on me. Deputy Mustache pointed a finger in my face. You stay here. Anyone else in there with him? I shook my head in stunned silence. Glowering at me, he pulled his own gun and moved toward the door going into the kitchen. The 2 deputies outside guarded me like I was Hannibal Lecter, their eyes flicking nervously to each other as they waited. After several minutes, I heard footsteps and turned to see my grandfather coming out of the house in front of the deputy. He was smiling and talking with the other man in low tones. My stomach clenched as I noticed the deputy had put away his gun. What was going on? Mustache gestured to the other 2 deputies. You can stow your guns for now, boys, but keep 'em ready. We've still got some things to sort out." He turned to me, his expression hard. "So your grandfather explained that he gave you a prescription for..." He pulled a brown pill bottle out of his pocket to read the label. "Clonazepam. Just 10 pills, cause you were having a lot of stress and trouble sleeping, what with being back at your deceased parents' home and all." Which is understandable. He had handed the bottle to my grandfather and now had his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "What is less understandable is why come you tied him up all morning and are making up these crazy tales." I started to respond, but he raised his hand. "Pard, the less you say right now, the better. You listen instead. Your grandpa is a good man, a respected doctor. Ever since your parents moved in there, he's made a point of coming around and helping out this community as he could, even though he lives hours away. And that's good for you," he said, pointing his finger at me again, "because he's convinced me not to lock you up today if you act right. He tells me that..." What was that word? My grandfather smiled. "Benzodiazepines," he supplied helpfully. Mustache nodded. "Yeah, that it can sometimes cause nightmares or hallucinations. Your grandpa believes you had some dream about him hurting someone that you took as real." He paused, looking hard at me to accentuate his point. "So how does that sound to you? Does that sound better than you just went crazy and tied him up for no reason?" I tried to keep myself from yelling. "No, that doesn't fucking sound good. I haven't taken any pills. He's lying." Deputy Mustache shook his head. "Sport, the problem there is I counted the pills and 2 are missing just like Dr. Barron said there would be. And this prescription is in your name." "So? That doesn't mean I took them, you idiot. I know what I saw. He carried a woman out into the woods. He admitted to me that he killed her." My grandfather stepped forward and headed off the deputy's angry response. "Look, it might help him accept that it was just a drug if you go ahead and look in the woods. Show him there's nothing there. I know it's a hassle, but..." Mustache was already nodding and smiling at him. No, doctor. It's fine. You feel up to coming with us?" "Sure thing. Jason, you want to lead the way?" My grandfather grinned and tipped me a wink. I led the deputies in the direction he had carried the woman, walking as far from my grandfather as I could. I kept imagining him suddenly attacking one of the deputies and getting his gun or bolting off into the woods. But he just walked along, as calm and pleasant as if we were on a midday stroll. I could tell the deputies were barely looking around, but honestly, there was little to see. To their credit, they went along with me for close to 2 hours before I gave up. I don't think he could have carried her out farther than we went in the time that he was gone the night before. And there was no trace of anything. As we headed back toward the house, my grandfather was suddenly beside me, patting me on the shoulder with his big, strong hand. I stifled a yelp and tried not to flinch away. Acting more crazy wasn't going to help anything at this point. "See?" he whispered to me. "I told you it would all be okay." 10 minutes later, the deputies were gone after making my grandfather promise he would call them if there was any more trouble. Any more trouble from me, the crazy druggie. As soon as they were out of sight, I turned on him. "How did you do that with the pills?" He looked a little sheepish, his hands in his trouser pockets as he shrugged. "It wasn't hard. I came up the day before you did. When I went into town, I ran across that woman at a gas station. From that encounter, I knew I would be hunting while I was here, so I went ahead and called in the prescription for you on the night voicemail of the pharmacy so it wouldn't be filled until the day you arrived. When we went to the grocery store, I picked up the prescription and kept it tucked away in case I needed it. After last night, I moved it to the kitchen drawer so it would be ready." "What? Ready for what? Why did you get the pills in the first place?" Now he looked slightly disappointed. "Well, for this. What we just did." He gestured around to where the deputies had been moments before. "It was a calculated risk that you might see or hear something if I took that woman while we were here, and I needed a way of explaining what you saw if you called the police. A bad dream from a drug side effect seemed like a good solution." I began to pace, my fist clenched at my side. Yeah, so you make me look crazy by planting drugs in the house. Not crazy, just stressed and taking a legally prescribed medication that didn't sit well with you. Better than them thinking I'm some kind of serial killer. I stopped, turning to scream at him. But you are! You are a fucking serial killer. 87 people? What do you think you are? He shook his head. I don't think it needs a name, really. I look at it like hunting, and the people I hunt hardly deserve to be counted as human. When I kill them, they're not even entirely human biologically, and they are certainly far removed from any moral or spiritual definition of the word. But serial killer? No, that term carries way too much baggage, and while technically correct in some ways, I think looking at me as a hunter is far more apt. I started to respond, but he continued. Look at it this way. In some parts of the world, sometimes you have a lion or bear that goes bad. They get a taste for people and they become a threat. He chuckled. Well, a bigger threat than a normal lion or bear. So the local people have to get together and hunt the bad animal down, because that animal is an anomaly. It is not natural. And by killing it, the people aren't just saving themselves, they're restoring balance. He gestured toward the woods where he had carried the woman. These people I kill, they aren't really people anymore. There's a lot more I need to explain to you, but the short answer is they are unnatural, and they are tied to terrible things beyond your wildest dreams. Looking up at the sky, he took a deep breath. Jason, I know this is all hard to believe, and I know you don't know me as well as you should. That's my fault. I tried to be a good father, but your mother was grown when Rebecca died, and to my shame, I was selfish in my grief. I isolated myself much of the time from her and your father, and from you. If I hadn't, you'd likely trust me more now. He looked back at me, his eyes glistening. But I was trying to do good. I still am trying to do good, and my hope is that you'll come to see the value in it. If you can be patient and listen to all I have to say and see what I have to show you. I felt so tired. I wanted to believe him, but how could I? I didn't know what to say anymore. Finally, I muttered, "What are you going to show me? Where you hid that poor woman's body?" He shook his head, smiling ruefully. "Oh no, that woman's body doesn't exist anymore. Literally, at least not here." Noticing my confused expression, he waved his hand. "Sorry, getting ahead of things. Let me tell you about that woman, but after that, if you're willing, I need you to go with me on a little trip." The wind was picking up and I suppressed a shiver. Trip? To where? The afternoon sun was high in the sky and shining down through the trees overhead. It left my grandfather dappled in shifting patches of light and shadow. He looked strange in the penumbra, both young and old, menacing and beneficent at the same time. I could see him grinning at me when he spoke. To where I study them. Part 8. Like I was telling you outside, I first ran into that woman you saw me toting into the woods at a gas station in town. That was the afternoon before you got here. Bear in mind, I'm trying to focus in on the past few days and wait to tell you all the rest when I can show you things as well, but there are some things I need to explain as we go so it will make more sense. For instance, how I can tell an outsider, that's what I call them for reasons that will be clearer in time, from a normal person. When I bit out Salk's throat, I must have swallowed close to a quart of his blood in the process. I didn't think about it at the time, but it's the best explanation I have for what happened next. I went for nearly 2 months after killing him without reading about any strange murderers or having any indication that the creature I'd seen was still out in the world. I was starting to think it was either truly over and some things would just remain a mystery, or at the very least my ability to intervene had ended with my lead on Salk. Then one day I was walking down a hallway at the hospital when I passed an old man. He appeared to be there visiting someone and was coming out from the downstairs cafeteria as I was about to go in. There was nothing remarkable about him at all, and as our eyes met at a distance, he gave me a polite nod and kept moving forward. But within 2 more steps of him, I was hit with a painful wave of nausea. My first thought was that I was just sick and the first symptoms were hitting, but then moments later I felt fine again, and I looked to see that the man had moved past me by a little more than the distance that we had been when I first felt sick. I pondered it for a moment and then decided to follow him. He had meandered into the nearby gift shop to peruse the handful of magazines and crossword puzzle books on offer amid the stuffed animals and overpriced snacks. I waited a few seconds and then entered behind him. Careful to stay out of his line of sight, I edged closer. Again, when I got within about 5 feet of him, I was struck with nausea. Not nearly as strong this time, but very distinct and unpleasant. I tested it several times, moving back and forth out of the invisible demarcation between well and unwell. It was as regular and reliable as flipping a switch. Something in Salk's blood had stayed with me, and it's become a huge asset in my work. Whenever I get close to one of these things, these outsiders, I feel that same familiar sick feeling. The range varies, but it's definitely grown over time to an average of about 20 feet. The first time is always bad, though I've grown accustomed to it enough that it isn't incapacitating. After the first time I make contact with one of them, from then on it's much weaker, though it never goes away entirely. And the feeling is unique to that particular outsider. Every first encounter with a new one is always strong. So going back to the other day when I encountered the woman, I was picking up some candy at the gas station, debating on whether I wanted to just eat junk food that night or actually get some kind of substantial dinner. And that's when the woman walked past me on the next aisle over. I knew right away what the feeling I got was, and the store was empty enough it was easy to tell who it was coming from. Of course, I didn't react in any way. I've been doing this for a long time, and I learned years ago to be careful you never tip your hand to one of them. Surprise is one of the few advantages we have, so it should never be squandered. Instead, I waited and listened. When she went up to the counter to pay for some kind of soft drink and chips, I heard the conversation between her and the cashier. They knew each other. Apparently went to church together. That meant she was local, so she would be easier to find later. As I pretended to look at a bag of chocolate-covered peanuts, I looked out the window to the only other customer car in the parking lot. It was a gold-colored sedan with some kind of back window decal I couldn't make out from that angle. I waited, hearing the cashier call the woman Susie as she said goodbye. Putting down the candy, I picked up another brand and made a show of studying the nutritional information on the back, which was a horror in and of itself. Susie was slow pulling away, but when she finally did, I saw 2 more things. The window decal was for Mid Creek Community College, which was only 20 miles away from here, and she had an educator tag on her car. Smartphones, as disturbing as they can be in some regards, are wonderful tools for the things I do. Obviously, any internet research or phone calls I make in connection with hunting is done with what they call burner phones, but they've come a long way, haven't they? Before I left the gas station, I had already found her, picture and all. Susan Avaretti, Associate Professor of Economics at Mid Creek Community College. A couple of more searches and I had found her home address. When I went out that night, I went to her house first, but no one was there. Next, I drove by the college, but there was no sign of her car there either. Then, as I was coming back through town, I saw the gold sedan at that late-night diner near the interstate. Slowing down, I could see her inside at a booth, eating some kind of waffle as she sat there by herself. That's the hardest part of this, Jason. You see these people, these things, living their public lives, showing their external face. If you're doing it right, they don't even know you're watching them. And they seem vulnerable, mundane, human. It's easy to forget that the woman sitting alone in the dingy diner, morosely gnawing on a waffle late at night, she isn't really a person. Not entirely. At best, that's only part of the truth. And the other part, well, believe me, if you ever let yourself forget the other part, you're liable to wind up dead. So you have to close yourself off from feeling sorry for them or seeing mercy as some kind of virtue. That kind of thinking almost killed me twice early on in all of this, and while it's the hardest lesson to learn, it's also one of the most important. I parked across the road from the diner in the shadow of a rundown pawn shop that had gone belly up years earlier from the look of it. I watched her eat her food, pay her bill, and get into her car. I followed her, and soon it was clear she was most likely going home based on her route. It was an educated guess, but worth the risk to get the jump on her. I turned off to take a different, slower route, making up the time and distance with speed and getting to her house 3 minutes before she did. From all signs, she lived alone, and I had unscrewed her porch light before she pulled up. As she was reaching into her purse for her house keys, I stepped out, slamming the syringe into her neck and pushing in the mixture it contained all within a couple of seconds. She made a small noise of surprise and flailed around for a couple of seconds, but she was already lost. The cocktail I give them contains a mixture of sedative and paralytic, and for the most part, they're on the ground within 10 seconds. The trick is managing the dosage and judging how much time you have. The right dose is enough to put a normal person into a coma or respiratory failure, but an outsider will push through it and come out in around an hour. As much as they share human frailties when you catch them by surprise, if you aren't done moving them and dealing with them before the time runs out, you better be ready with another dose, or you have a major problem. But with her, everything went smoothly enough. I loaded her in the back of my SUV, brought her back here, and I had her in the woods all within 45 minutes. Then I just had to finish her off. I know that sounds cold. It felt very cold to me the first few times I thought about it in those terms. But when you see the things they do, it's not all brutal killings like Salt would do. Many of them are far more clever and insidious. When you face the realities of that kind of evil, well, your sensibilities start to change quite a bit. Your willingness to do harm, your tolerance for cruelty, it slowly becomes more palatable. At the best, and the worst of times, it becomes righteous. And that's one of the dangers too. You have to understand these things to kill them, but you have to keep yourself separate too. When I perform a surgery, I want the patient to live very badly, but I can't let myself care about them or worry about them at a personal level. That emotion would get in the way, making me hesitate or make a mistake. It's the same thing with this. You cannot do this out of a sense of revenge, and you can't let yourself become like the thing that you're hunting. In any case, the best and cleanest way to kill an outsider is to destroy what I call the seed. All of them, when they are alive and for a short while after they are dead, have this small black, well, it looks like a pebble usually. It's tucked just beneath the left hippocampus most of the time. The hippocampus, as you may know, is part of the temporal lobe of the brain and is tied to creating memories as well as complex emotions. I have a theory that's why the seed is so close by. It makes it easier for it to influence the outsider's perceptions and reactions to things. That's also why when the pretense is not needed, such as when I was in Salt's closet or when he had me tied up, they're quick to revert to an almost emotionless default state. But we can talk more about all that later. For now, back to the point. If you drill into the left side of the skull, just in front of and about halfway up the height of the ear, you will often hit the seed. It may take 3 or 4 tries, but a moderately powerful cordless drill works just fine with some weight applied to pushing it in, and assuming you have a long enough drill bit, of course. The seed itself is fairly fragile, and when the bit hits it, it'll shatter. Then something remarkable happens. There's a low vibration you can feel in the air. It reminds me of the rumble hum you feel it in a subway station sometimes. And then the body is just gone. More accurately, it collapses in on itself like some kind of dying star, but it's too fast to see with the naked eye. I've managed to catch some evidence of it on special cameras, but for a reason that will be explained, that's a difficult process in and of itself. But when it goes, it all goes. The body, the clothing it was wearing, and anything else that is inorganic and on it, or inside of it. I've taken to leaving the drill in when I hit the seed, as it removes the need for me to dispose of a bloody tool later. Even the blood from the drilling, if it is still physically connected to the body, will all go away. That's why I make sure to drill through a folded up towel. If I keep pressure on and do it quickly enough, I can finish with no trace of the person ever being there at all. That being said, my grandfather stopped, his face looking concerned and angry as he looked out the window. We were in the living room now, and as I turned to look outside, I saw a pickup truck flying up the road to the house. It was hard to see at that distance and speed, but it looked like several people were in the bed of the truck, all of them wearing hoodies and masks. Shit. My grandfather was standing up, his face hard. Apparently someone at the sheriff's office is part of the house and figured out who you were talking about when you said I had a woman last night. I was standing up myself now, looking between the road and my grandfather, feeling more and more bewildered. The house? What? My grandfather shook his head. The House of the Claw. It's a cult. They're human, but very deadly. No time to explain now. We running or killing? Your call. I could barely breathe. Running? He nodded, reaching under the chair he had been sitting in to pull out a semi-automatic pistol. Fair enough. Stay close to me and don't stop unless I say so. We're going for my truck. Now go. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. And also click the notification bell, as it does seem to help people get notified when new parts of this story as well as others come up. You can also visit Verastahl.com for more information about my books, news, and updates. Until next time.